Oh, and I have to say, okay. Yep.
Yes, we are on. Hello and welcome to our port call with Bente Halkier. Our captain today is on holiday, so I'm stepping in without a proper captain hat, but this cowboy hat from Wyoming will have to do. But enough about hats. Hello, Bente, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us where you are and what you do?
Yes. I'm a professor in sociology at the Department of Sociology at Copenhagen University in Denmark. And I usually do most of my research on food in everyday life. So food consumption and how food consumption is being questioned and problematized, and how people in everyday life handle that. And that's where practice series come in handy. If you
Thank
want
you.
to know something, sorry?
Yes, I think our pirate Deborah will ask.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. In fact, I was going to ask, what did you first encounter practice theory?
When I first encountered it, oh, that's many years ago. It was at a midterm conference in the European Sociological Association network. There's a sociology consumption network, and we had our midterm conference in Bergen in Norway. And at that meeting, Alan Ward presented his first draft for the 2005 article. Well, I don't know whether it was the first, but it was the first time that the network heard about his endeavor in that. So that was my first meeting with it in 2002 in Norway.
And in these encounters with practice theory, what attracted you to using it? What attracted you to practice theory in the first place?
Oh, that can be put very shortly. I was attracted to practice theory and still is because it strikes a nice balance between doings and sayings. And that was very important to me at the time when I met it, because at that time I was not working in a sociology department, but in a media and communication department, where there was a lot about sayings and not so much about doings. And I was one of the odd ones out who insisted on doing research on people's contexts and their practices, etc. So it was so nice to find a theoretical perspective that, of course, did not explain everything. I mean, I would be suspicious if theoretical perspectives tried to do that, but that made a lot of sense in relation to my research interests, and also my, I think, in some ways, sociological identity, being a kind of an undercover sociologist in this communication and media department.
And now that you found this theoretical lens, what ideas are you currently working with?
At the moment, I'm currently working with defining and trying to flesh out the category of normalization as a process that can help changing eating practices in social networks towards less resource-intensive consumption, and how such processes can be supported by alliances between public and private collective actors. And so that comes from a long series of research projects where I've been interested in looking at what happens not only when kind of some change processes start, but also what makes them kind of reproduce and continue, and what is a change. How can you actually talk about when something is a change and when something is a reproduction? And usually it's quite intertwined with each other. But some of my current research projects at the moment point in those directions as well. So one of the ones that I'm finishing at the moment, or rather it finishes in 1.5 years, but it feels like the end of it because it started 4 years ago almost. So, but that research project is working across 3 different areas of practices: food, mobility, and housing, and also works across a kind of the distinction between everyday life consumption on the one hand, and then what you might, in our research project, we term institutional material arrangements with professional practitioners. And so we put all these things together in order to analyze the possible pathways towards less resource-intensive consumption patterns. And normalization, originally, my interest came from some earlier projects, but it has turned out to become one of the things that we're discussing and seeing in our analysis as well in this project.
Thank you for sharing these ideas with us. And now I think it's the turn of the anthropologist.
That's great, thanks. So yeah, so I'm an anthropologist and I've got some questions about the tribes that you're part of. But first, I'm curious, I'd like to pick up what you said about practice theory not covering everything. So could you just say briefly what you think it's really bad at doing?
I think at least there are a lot of discussions about whether practice theories can be used for studying more macro kind of phenomenons. So, and we've been struggling a little bit in this project I mentioned before with kind of defining how we understood what we now call institutional material arrangements, which we just really used as a shortcut for ourselves when we applied for the money. And now we've been struggling for the past 3 years with trying to define how is this related to other kinds of concepts that might be seen as parallel. So it's the eternal kind of debate about the flat ontology of practice theories and what does that imply then? So there are some borders there that at least people discuss whether practice theories can actually deal with these things or not. And other things I would mention that maybe practice theories can do but haven't been used very much at necessarily have been some of the more kind of stuff about reflexivity and more kind of focusing on the sayings and the discourses, etc., which used to be something I had to relate to because I was in a communication and media department. And so I've been very interested in symbolic interaction and social interactions. And to me, that seems to be at the core of what practices are about as well, but it hasn't gotten perhaps the attention. And maybe it's because other researchers think that practice theories are not very good at dealing with that, and maybe you should just use some other theories for that. So that was just 2 examples of that.
Okay. So now I get my questions about tribes. I mean, as you know, practice theory is not one thing. So are there
Absolutely.
tribes within practice theory that you feel more connected to?
I think I feel more connected to the tribes within this major community where people see doings and sayings as kind of more on an equal footing. So in the sense that researchers who not necessarily as a kind of a very firm starting point say that everything almost is routinized. So I identify more with the kind of practice theory researchers who say that, well, yes, there's a lot of stuff that's routinized that we do all the time, but that there's also room for some sorts of reflexivity, and there's especially room for also more explicit kind of negotiations about how to behave in different kinds of areas, which is something you can see just in the food. I mean, food on the one hand is extremely routinized for many people, and on the other hand, people post their smallest cup of coffee on Instagram, hoping to get some sort of conversation about it. And then there's everything in between and the politicization of all the different issues pertaining to food. So
now about tribes a bit more broadly. Are you part of a group that's working with these ideas, or do you feel on your own still?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that I'm part of a kind of group of practice theoretical researchers here in Copenhagen University. But on the other hand, I recounted yesterday evening, my last 8 research projects have been taking a starting point in practice theories, and I've been working with other people who were also interested in using practice theories. And even my latest project, which will I hope will enjoy the anthropologist. It's together with an anthropologist, and we have a lot of discussions here in the start about how to actually conceptualize routines and practices. Not that we necessarily disagree, but she comes with some other ways of looking at practices which are not necessarily theorized in the same manner as I kind of almost take for granted now. So, and we're going to do a small qualitative study on how people deal with the ecological challenges in their food habits in 4 different generations. So we have to kind of get into the kernel of what we think we can use as a starting point for looking at people's practices, even though we may come from different directions. We're heading towards looking at ambivalence as part of it, which is really exciting, I think. That's a nice starting point to already do that, think about that even before you start doing the empirical stuff.
Okay, there's lots to do. So yeah, we've got a couple of questions now about who else. You've had a little look, I hope, at the map of practice theory enthusiasts that we sent you the link to. So where should we go next? Who would you like to talk to? Who would you like us to talk to, more exactly?
Yes. Yes. Can you mention more than one?
You can.
You
We
can.
won't necessarily promise to do that, but
No,
you can
no, of
offer.
course not. Yeah. Well, I would mention Marie Pless from Paris as the first one. I think she's on your map. I think I saw her. So the three women I chose, if I could talk about more than one, were all on your map as far as I could see. But Marie Pless is for sure. And
Yeah.
what is particularly interesting about her is that she works a lot with quantitative methods and combines that with a practice theoretical perspective. And we once taught in a PhD course together where she was the quantitative person and I was the qualitative person, and both drawing on practice theoretical inspirations, which was really inspirational.
That could be good. That could be good. Yeah.
I'll stick with her then.
Okay. Yeah. We'll see where we get with that.
Yeah.
And one final thing, we'd really like you to give us a souvenir, something to take with us on our travels on the boat. So
Of course.
have you thought of something, an object or picture or something? You've got it.
Yes, I have a photo of something that is very necessary when you go traveling, food, of course. And I've chosen a photo. Let me see if I can share it now. Here it is. Yep. Can you see that now?
I can.
A huge photo of it's a January king cabbage from my garden. And I chose the cabbage because when I'm out doing kind of public panel debates and presentations, etc., I a lot of times I start my introductions with saying something like, okay, what we're going to discuss here today is whether cabbage and chickpeas can actually handle the climate crisis, ? And that's, of course, a big question mark. So I thought you should have some cabbage.
I think that'll keep scurvy at bay as we travel around the world on our trip of practice. So thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Looks delicious.
I'll send it.
Okay, thank you and goodbye.
Bye. Thank you for inviting and stopping by.
And